Welcome once more, gentle readers, to Roll Off a Tangent. We're now on episode 32. I'm Robert Gibson, and my fellow team members are Nikita Zuev and XJ. This time we're discussing Clark Ashton Smith's The End of the Story. It's the first of his 10 Averoigne tales set in a magic-drenched province of medieval France. It was published in the May 1930 issue of Weird Tales. It's a cautionary tale, warning of the perils of forbidden knowledge and the loss of innocence to evil. Quick summary of the plot. Christophe Morand, a young law student living in somewhere in that medieval French province, is received as a guest at the abbey of Perigon. The benign and courteous abbot, Hilaire, gives Christophe the run of the abbey's library, where he reads a manuscript concerning the nearby ruined castle of Fausseflammes and its unhallowed reputation. Despite the abbot's warnings, Christophe becomes obsessed with the fate of an earlier traveller to Fausseflammes. He himself then dares to visit the castle, enters its crypt, and finds himself in a beautiful Grecian world where he meets the gorgeous Nicaea, who welcomes him as her lover. But it all turns out to be an illusion when the abbot Hilaire appears, suddenly banishes the evil dream by means of holy water, and informs Christophe that Nicaea is a lamia, a serpentine vampire who ensnares men with her charms. The story ends with Christophe resolved to return, nevertheless, to Nicaea, since he cannot help but prefer the illusion to reality. Now, who's going to lead the discussion this time? Nikki?
Sure, I'll take a crack at it. So, what an interesting story. Interesting not because it is in some way, shape, or form very original, because let's face it, someone being tempted by a powerful being, especially a demon, this Faustian situation is, let's put it this way, if it's not a cliche, then nothing is a cliche, right? It's one of those fundamental stories. And yet, Clark Ashton Smith shines in three aspects that I at least can mention at this very time. Firstly, it's of course the way this man writes. Oh, the way this man writes, it makes me angry actually, because it's just so good. I wish I could write this way every single time I pick up a pen or clack on my keyboard, let's say, because that's the type of writer I am. I write mostly on the computer. And for that, you just must applaud the absolute craftsmanship that can be seen in the end of the story. Besides the obvious, there's also this very interesting how would I say? I would say story within the story about the ancient time, the stuff that Christophe gets to read about, and that is a very tricky thing to pull off, to tell a story within the story. We've had one other work that I can remember at this point that tried this. It was The Devil's Daughter, which is also about demons. And there, XJ, he was the one who wrote that story. He also had a story within the story, but that story sort of took the majority of the time of the plot and what was going on. Here, however, Clark Ashton Smith manages to tell the tale of this different character that Christophe reads about, gets us invested in what happens, and leaves us with a mystery. And that, for me at least, created this feeling of camaraderie with Christophe. Because just like him, I was now curious. what is really going on here? Who is that guy that got lost so long ago? And it's a dangerous move. Story within the story. It's very hard to pull off, and it was done really well, in my opinion. And then the third point that I would say is, of course, the ending. Oh, something fell there on some point at someone's desk. Yeah, the end of the story is also pulled off really well. To me, it seems as if Mr. Smith is really good at endings, because we've read 3 stories: The Immeasurable Horror, Zithra, and now the end of the story. And all 3 of them have really punchy, well-written endings. Not endings that are surprising, let's put it this way, unless we're talking about Zithra, because the rest of them are, if not predictable, quite normal. Let's put it that way. There isn't this big reveal or something at the end, because I think we all know where it's going after Christophe has interacted with the Limian once. But they are written in such a way where, even though most of us will probably know where it's going, it's still something that would touch at your heartstrings at the end. Something that will leave you with a lasting impression. And that is, I think, true showmanship of a master author. So, if you didn't guess it, I liked the story. Actually, what did you think about it?
Hello. Well, greetings to our dear listeners. Before I even begin, I have to say I am suffering from a cold. So if I sound a little bit nasal, my apologies, and I've taken to muting myself just so, the recording can go smoothly as it can during when other people are talking, basically. So first of all, I have to say, I didn't enjoy the story quite as much as I did the other 2. That said, well, just because it is quite predictable, like Nikki had expressed. That said, I am also with Nikki on this one. The penmanship is chef's kiss. It's really good. I also wish I can write like that. Yeah. It is
I also wish you could write like that.
Oh, shut up. Yeah. It is with a mixture of admiration and pure envy whenever I read Clark Ashton Smith, and this time round is no different. It's poetry, man. It's just the way he describes the environment, just the way he turns the sentences around. It just shows mastery of the craft beyond what even Hemingway can do. Yeah, and I don't care who disagrees with me on that.
Yeah, it's the opposite of Hemingway in that Smith is goes into lusciousness, the resources of prose, whereas Hemingway is pared down to the absolute minimum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I recognize the skill it comes when it's like being simple is not an easy thing to do. But Hemingway takes it to a monastic extent. It's very bare. And yeah, it's just not very compelling to me. But yeah, like I said, Clark Ashton Smith, my man, wish he was still alive. Yeah. Yeah. But going back to the story itself, I think there is one thing that really struck me, and I really like the way it opened. It opened with like a it opened as if it was a newspaper report of some kind. And then it starts off, when it starts off, you straight away know what happened to the protagonist. Because the very first paragraph or sentence even basically told us what happened to Christophe in the end. And I can think, and that's a very daring move, I have to say.
I agree.
There are certain stories where, I mean, because basically you're giving away the plot. You're giving away the plot, and it is very difficult then to, what are the words? I'm trying to think of the way to describe it. It's like you've given away the plot. So what else is there? It is going to draw your readers in, and I can, like, I right now I can only think of one other piece of work that started off that way and still manages to grip you all the way towards the end, and that is Grave of the Fireflies. The very first dialogue or monologue really is, I can't quite recall the exact words, but the protagonist was narrating a certain date, and then he said, "On that day I died," and that you basically know what happens to him and his little sister, and then you basically are in for a ride where you know how it's gonna end. Yeah, and I think that's a pretty daring move to take. Yeah, and that's my take. I didn't quite enjoy the story as much, but the writing is superb.
As always, yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned this this daring move, right? Saying what's going to happen right at the beginning. I think, right, and you may disagree, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it. But for me, someone who can seamlessly tell you what will happen at the end, but at you realizing it at the very beginning of the story and make a loop. To me, that is probably the strongest way to write a short story that I've ever experienced. I've experienced only once that it was done, so beautifully, and I've been thinking about it for about like 5 minutes now, and it is a great shame to me that the name of the story escapes me. What if I do remember it? I'll say it on the podcast. But if I were to summarize it, basically the story begins with two men talking about a body that they found, right? And then one of them walks out the door, and then we go into being with somebody who's walked out of the door of a hospital, and they're moving about and so on and so forth. And that protagonist, we follow him the entire way through the story, and then they get hit by a car, and we start again exactly the same scene, and it's these two guys talking about the body, and then that guy walks out, and it's honestly it blew my mind the first time I really, it sucks that I can't remember the name of it. If I remember it,
if you don't remember the story, then I guess it's not that memorable after all.
But it was a very memorable story. It's just my my mind is really
yeah, it's like it takes confidence to write like that, to just give away the story within the first paragraph.
Yeah. Sure. Robert, what do you think about the story? Do you agree with XJ that it's not the strongest out of the three?
I don't agree with it necessarily being less strong because it's more predictable, because I think this sort of story has to be predictable. It has to, shall we say, access the main current of the main thematic current of this kind of story, and in order to do that, it's got to fulfill the expectations of the reader, and in order to do that, it's got to be predictable. Just tangentially, the point that Nikki just made about the giving away the plot, because we're told that Christophe Morand disappears in the first sentence. I think XJ made that point as well. Another of Smith's stories, a science fiction one this time, The Vaults of Yo Vombis, has exactly the same structure. It's narrated in the very first sentence that the explorer has disappeared, and then it gives the narrative of the explorer. Anyway, that's by the way.
Actually, sorry to
yeah,
interrupt.
go on.
I'm just thinking that Venus story, the immeasurable horror, it kind of gave away the ending of the story in the beginning, didn't it?
In a way that it makes it pretty obvious that the
expedition was doomed. Yeah.
is not much of a picnic. Yes, yeah.
Right, but there you have the excitement of, because we've all read stories where someone gets corrupted by demonic influence, but there's not that many stories of people going on expeditions to Venus, right? So how Clark Ashton Smith exactly going to describe how badly this expedition went is still exciting, even though you know that it's going to be, it's not going to end well. It doesn't really. I mean, the name of the story is immeasurable horror, so I don't think it doesn't really matter what he's going to say at the beginning there. We know it's going to be an immeasurable horror.
I mean, that's true. The meal itself is different, I suppose, than just run of the mill Dracula story. And actually, I have a question for Rob.
Oh,
when was the end of the story written?
It was I don't know about written, but it was published in 1930.
Oh, okay. So Dracula predates the end of the story.
33 years earlier, yes.
I'm running through Dracula in my mind, and I'm finding a fair bit of similarities actually. Yeah. Dracula also started it was also mostly written in journal form, right?
Yeah.
but there's many POVs in the journal of Dracula. Like that, there's many people writing many different points of view. It's actually, I know we're not talking about Dracula, but that's why I really like Bram Stoker's Dracula. It's because it's written from multiple points of view, and you can feel that somebody else is now talking or telling the tale or is giving the account of the tale, and it colors the book that way.
I also just like the vehicle in which he delivers that, because he didn't just switch point of view. It's you start like every switch of a point of view is pretty much a letter written to somebody else or a journal entry. Was that the way, or was that how it was throughout the entire thing, or did it stop somewhere midway when Van Helsing and his crew went to?
I think the whole thing is in epistolary form or report form. All of
What was the term? What was the term that you use?
Epistolary.
Epistolary.
To do with letters. It's, letters.
So it's actually got an official name. It's like a noted technique.
Yeah.
Never knew that.
Epistolary was also used in the H.P. Lovecraft's Call of Cthulhu, of sorts, with the different points of view. Now it wasn't letters, so to speak, but it is very similar in the It's so I would say it merits being under the same umbrella. Are we ready for my conspiracy theory minute about the story?
I guess you're really dying to let us know what the conspiracy.
Can I just make one minor point, which is so minor I'll probably forget it if something more interesting comes up later, and that is that I've got this amazing ability to not ask myself questions when I'm reading, and I've read this story innumerable times, and it's only the last reading that I read for this podcast that I realized that a very interesting question is, what did the abbot Hilaire see at the end? Did he also see the magical Grecian country and the Lamia in her womanly form, or did he all along see it all as it really was? It's not really clear from the story. Anyway, I'll leave that with you. And
No, no, no. Let's pursue that, because the same thought popped into my mind when I read the story. I was like, how was it that Hilaire could describe to Christophe in such exact details when Hilaire found Christophe? I was like, either Hilaire had seen the vision for himself and had fallen under the spell of the Lamia at least once himself, so he knows what he's talking about, or something else. I was like, that was the one thing that stuck in my mind when I read that section. I was like, how does Hilaire know so much about the vision?
I think we're going to have it explained now by Nicky.
So, time for conspiracy theory. Listen. All right, here we go. So we've got let's just describe the situation from the outside perspective. We have a man who travels long and far, and he meets a monastery monk, a priest who is very welcoming. Now, it is said that the Christians, at least at that time, were quite welcoming to travelers and so on and so forth. So that's not that strange. Let's put it that way. But this monk, this priest, lives very lavishly. Oh, so very lavishly, like a noble, which is a very strange thing for a priest to do, especially at those times. Not only that, but he considers himself a connoisseur of things, and one of the one of the tenets of priesthood is being humble. So this priest is not humble in any way, shape, or form, and the very first thing that he offers to Christophe is texts of both Christian origin and hedonistic origin, which, of course, in the monasteries they had both. But it's not like you would.
Just a slight correction. It's not hedonistic. It's heathendom. I think. So
yeah, but isn't that basically hedonistic? Like
hedonism is the philosophy of pleasure. Whereas heathendom,
I guess it's just my accent. I mean heathen.
Oh, right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. Heathen, from the word heathen. Which, okay, it's not weird that a monastery has this stuff, but it is weird that you would give that thought into a random traveler's brain straight away as he comes in. And Christophe notes that somehow it felt like Hilaire almost knew what he wanted and have a very strange moment. And during the time when Christophe is looking through things, it's Hilaire who tells him that there is a book here that you shouldn't read. Right? It's not that Christophe finds it and then Hilaire's like, no, stop it. You can't touch this one. No, Hilaire tells him, hey, by the way, there's this really powerful book of powerful dark magic. Don't look at it. Very strange. And not only that, he as a priest is constantly creating situations in which Christophe has the possibility to stay longer at the monastery. which leads to me to believe that he is in cahoots with the Lamia. Not only that, but I think that's where he's getting all of this fantastical literature from. Things that survived from Alexandria? What? In medieval, like in post-medieval France in 1783, you have texts from Alexandria. How do you even know what Alexandria is? Like it's some monastery in the countryside. This is insane. But, my dear friends, what do we find out about the realm of the Lamia? It's Greek. So, I mean, now we know where the literature comes from.
So
yeah.
Before you go on weaving that fantastical tale, to borrow some of your vocabulary, there are some cultural contexts here that I'm missing, I think. So it actually did occur to me as I was reading the book. I knew as like secondhand knowledge that the monks of the Middle Ages were responsible for having kept a lot of the knowledge that was lost during the fall of the Roman Empire. That they very assiduously and very carefully just kept the books in libraries and very painstakingly copied everything that they could, passing it down, then just safekeeping all that knowledge within the domain. So they did play a very important role in transmitting whatever was all of the thoughts and discoveries of the Roman Empire down to past when the Roman Empire fell apart. I am not certain, however, if they made any discriminations between what sort of books they keep. Were they like pack rats and then they just kept everything, or did they pick and choose what they keep? And some of the titles that Hilaire brought up, I am not sure if they even exist. Like, I know for sure the undocumented dialogues of Plato probably doesn't exist, but all the other stuff, I'm not sure.
Well, yes, again, you're completely right. So to answer your first question regarding what did they choose to keep, a lot of the stuff that they did keep, they even altered in some ways. So if you think of the Scandinavian and Viking folklore, a lot of it was Christianized and changed when the monks kept it. They changed things in order to fit their narrative, right? And that is just one instance, for example, right? Like what had occurred. So it is very hard to say how much of what came to us was truly from those ages, because a lot of things have been changed. And Alexandria, I don't know if you know this, but Alexandria is basically this. It's the holy grail of libraries. It's the Library of Alexandria.
Is that the one of the 7 lost wonders of the world or something like that, up there with the Hanging Gardens of Babylon?
Well, it wasn't in the official list of 7 wonders, but it was famous throughout antiquity. The library.
That was the one that burned down in a fire?
Yes.
Yes.
Right,
yes.
right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Sabotaged. Many people, many contemporary people have said that it was sabotage, that someone had set it on fire, but we don't know.
Fascinating. So one last question.
Yes, of course.
What you're saying is that none of those books from antiquity would have survived unchanged in a monk's library, that everything would have been written, cleansed, purified, if you are going to use that word, to fit the Christian narrative?
I mean, it wouldn't be everything for sure, but a lot of text. It's just I brought you an example of what could have occurred. with such texts, that they could have been changed and altered like Scandinavian tales were.
So basically, what we're looking at here is that Hilaire's library is very out of the norm, because most of the texts would have been censored.
Yeah. Not only would it be censored, they can't even, like, regardless if they were censored, scripts from the Library of Alexandria in the middle of France in 1780, forget it. There's no way he could have this normally, right? It's just it's a supernatural, the fact that he has it. Maybe like how people sometimes say sometimes real life is weirder than fiction. It may be possible, but if somebody just told you that as a librarian, you'd be like, that's preposterous that they would have texts from Alexandria somewhere in the middle of France.
But I don't think that the author, Clark Ashton Smith, intended this explanation. So if you're trying to build this conspiracy theory, I think you're going beyond the story.
I don't think so.
Enough,
well, I don't think so, because why would he put things that are, at least in my mind, in 1930, if somebody was reading a story, I think there would have been a well-read aficionado of tales, right? So to me, I think if you read this in 1930, you would also be thinking, how does he have the scripts of Alexandria? That, for me, that's basically the two biggest what is it called, indications that this could be an actually viable story within the actual tale, is the fact that he has all of these artifacts and knowledge that's kind of impossible to have from Greece, right? From the time of ancient Greek and antiquity. And the fact that at the very end, right? This is the point that I haven't mentioned before. At the end, it's like he lets him go, knowing that Christophe is doomed, right? If he's seen this before many times, he knows what's happening next. And how could he have seen this so many times before? Does this happen every week? Every month? What does he mean by many times before? How long have you been living? Perhaps that is another point. What if this man has existed for thousands of years, serving this Lamia, bringing these people to her, and that's how he has all of these manuscripts, because he lived at that point. He lived in Greece. That could be another explanation.
Well, he didn't do a very good job of serving the Lamia if he comes and interrupts the whole thing with his holy water. I mean,
you gotta, what's it called? You gotta create cover for yourself, right? You gotta be like,
well,
don't worry about it.
I mean, so it did cross my mind to wonder what kind of role Hilaire exactly plays, because he basically, I was suspicious. In a story like this, you got to be suspicious of everybody, right from the start. So when I read of the monastery, it just seems so strange. Like you're lost in the woods in a part of France. You have no idea where you are, and then all of a sudden there's this monastery in the middle of nowhere, conveniently situated for you to find. And the abbot of that monastery is well stocked enough to offer you a very luxurious repast, and it is also very conveniently situated away from these cursed ruins. And so I did read wondering what role Hilaire actually plays in the whole thing, but I don't know if there is enough within the story itself to imply that Hilaire is a part of the Lamia's little scam,
I wanted to read you the passage that started me on this journey. When I had breakfast, I told Hilaire, with many expressions of gratitude for his hospitality, that it was time for me to resume my journey. But his regret at the announcement of my departure was so unfeigned, his invitation to tarry for at least another night was so genuinely hearty, so sincerely urgent, that I consented to remain. In truth, I required no great amount of solicitation, for apart from the real liking I had taken to Hilaire, the mystery of the forbidden manuscript had entirely enslaved my imagination, and I was loth to leave without having learned more concerning it. Also, for a youth with scholastic leanings, the freedom of the abbot's library was a precious opportunity, not to be passed over.
You should consider. You should consider reading for one of the witches' part in Macbeth.
Thank you.
But
Dabble, toil, and trouble.
yeah,
Go on.
perfect, man. I tend not to read too much into things without without like further inputs from like the author, which means I can leave questions unanswered in my mind when I read a story. So again, like I said, it did occur to me that Hilaire is part of the scam. Whatever the Lamia's plan is, but there just isn't enough in the story to really paint a clear picture on what Hilaire, on the role that Hilaire plays. For all we know, he could have been like a guy that was somehow tied up in the curse with the Lamia, and he sees himself as somebody who tries to save whoever he can. That is also possible, although his actions doesn't seem to be very
His actions indicate the opposite, because
again, like I said, my thing is I'm leaving the question open. I can leave the question open because there just isn't enough to go on. But either way, I agree with you, Nikki. Hilaire's role is very suspicious. There's more to the man than meets the eye, for sure.
Yeah, I guess to me the passage I read to you when I read it the second time, because I read stories more than once for this our podcast. I was like, this is the smoking gun. It's for sure the smoking gun. Why is this abbot desiring that this young man stays, even though he knows he is being tempted by this book?
Well,
and moreover,
probably.
Hold on, let me finish. Why does an abbot keep a book that he knows does this to people?
Maybe it can't be destroyed. I
Okay,
mean, that's
a maybe on top of a maybe, okay?
There are, like I said, that's why I said there's not enough to go on. But putting all that aside, I do have a question for both of you. And I'm just wondering, how likely is it to just stumble upon ruins in Europe? That was the one?
Likely.
Huh? Very likely?
Pretty likely. Especially in those times, yeah.
So that was very interesting to me, because I was like, wait a minute. This guy is just like riding along the road through a part of France, and then all of a sudden he comes upon a monastery, and then there's like ruins right next to the monastery, and I'm like, Europe sounds very crammed.
There's ruins within a walking distance of where I live, actually.
Oh, damn.
Yeah,
There's an abbot called Hilaire there. Yeah. So it's Grigor's tales.
No, it's Dark Age ruins, a ruined chapel and a ruined bits near to it. Yeah,
That's really fascinating. Well,
there are also ruins quite close to me. I just wanted to point out.
Your room?
No. Well, my room is also ruins. No. I'm talking about other parts
Right.
of this region here.
That's fascinating. I mean, I grew up in a pretty young country, and it's also very small. So just wandering around and then running into ruins is just not a part of my life experience. That's crazy. I love that.
Yeah.
Mm.
Come over, we'll show you many ruins.
Uh, so the last time I was in Europe was a few years ago. I was in Amsterdam. No, what am I saying? I was in the Netherlands. The Netherlands. Why do I always mistake? I'm sorry.
Amsterdam is in Netherlands, so.
Yeah, but I have this really horrible habit of mixing up the Dutch and the Danish all the time. No offense to whoever might be from that region listening. But yeah, I was in a small town, and some of the buildings are really old, but they were restored, and just wasn't any of that stumbling into ruins in my backyard kind of feeling like Rob was describing.
Mm.
I've had just the strangest experience just now. I felt as if someone's very warm breath went across my neck. That's very creepy.
That's the Lamia, I'm sure.
Yeah, it must be.
Yeah, watch out, Nikki.
Well, I mean, the kisses are sweet. From what I hear.
Garlic, holy water, and a cross. That's what you need.
I did eat some onion today, so maybe that will like help me a little bit.
Onions, man. They're not garlic.
Yeah, on our now recurring segment of how to make this story better, or if we want to write a sequel, I think there is just one little bit that could make this story better, and then I'll move on to talking about a sequel. To me, there is a lot of preamble towards where we get to the supernatural, and I think if there was something with supernatural happening with Hilaire there, not when he comes in at the end. Now, of course, that happens, right? But if we were just to get to see something out of the ordinary when Hilaire was present there, I think it would go a long way into building the narrative and making things more mysterious, right? Because to me, I think at a certain point, it's another trope, right? That only the protagonist gets to see the strangeness right until the very end, and then at the very end, also somebody else also joins into the situation. But I think this is something that the story could have benefited from a little bit, having a little bit more of the strange being shared around, so that like other people could interact with this sort of situation, and not merely the protagonist, because that way at least you have a more powerful journey towards the end. Yeah, even though we know how it will end, I think one of the best things that Clark Ashton Smith is the journey. The same as in the Immeasurable Horror, which there was the journey towards the towards the end of the expedition, and it's the same here, right? It's all about the journey, and if the journey was a little bit more exciting, I think the story would be even better. I'm not saying it's bad, right? I'm just saying it would be even better. Like Zithro, for example, right? It's written by the same author. It has so many twists and turns before we actually get to the situation. The scene with the lepers alone. What is one more king? Oh God, I love that whole scene, that interaction. Honestly, I could make an entire movie about those lepers. That was such a cool moment, and it's just a little moment, right? We don't never come back to them, but it's so powerful, and I think we could have benefited from this story having its own lepers, if you get my meaning.
Well, I want to hear from Rob actually, because you haven't said much.
It's just for I think one ought to just do a bit of quantitative analysis here. It's just 4 pages into this 20-page story that the flavour of supernaturalism begins when Christophe is warned against looking at that book. That's when the supernatural flavour really enters it. Although even on the first page, actually, there's some rather creepy impressions of the forest, although they are just impressions. But just 4 pages into a 20-page story, I think, is enough to feed the avid reader with the necessary droplets of supernaturalism. So I don't agree with
I was
anything
wishing
you
for
said.
I was wishing for something more explicit rather than like, oh, don't touch this book. This book is bad. I was
Well,
more talking about, you know, like snakes coming out of it,
oh, but
dangerous looking eyes, you know, popping out on the wall, and
that's
that's when
so
Hilaire
crude.
says like, don't touch the book, you know.
Oh, that'd be so crude. I don't think we
Oh,
want.
how dare you, Robert? It would be fantastic. I don't think it would
No,
be crude at all.
sophisticated readers don't need that sort of thing.
Well, I'm glad I'm not part of those idiots.
So I'm actually with Robert on this one. I don't think this
Uh-huh.
story needs more explicit.
You've betrayed the pew pew, XJ. How dare you?
Well, there's no pew pews in this story. Not
But
at
there
all.
would be if there were eyes on the wall.
Nah, I mean, some stories are meant to be low key, and this is one of those. I feel. So wait, that's not quite the right way to say it. I think this is one of those stories where the author tries to keep everything as normal as possible until the actual moment of the flip. And in that's how I read it anyway. And in that respect, it seems complete as a story. I don't know if I want to change it in any way, even though I don't enjoy it as much as the other Clark Ashton Smith's story. I think the only way it can be better is not the short story itself, but if it's expanded into more. And I think, Rob, you said that there are sequels, right? This is just one of 20.
Yes, there are 10 Averoigne stories, and I want to say in particular that one of them, The Enchantress of Hilaire, has almost exactly the same plot structure and the same meaning, really, as this one. And it also ends with the person, it's not a first person narration like this one, it's in the third person. But anyway, the protagonist ends up by preferring illusion to reality. And it would be really interesting to get the opinion of you guys on those two stories compared. It'd be good to compare The Enchantress of Hilaire with the end of the story, see what you think.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm always up to reading more of Clark Ashton Smith.
Yeah.
No, I think you have what's it called? Misconstrued my opinion. I'm not saying that the story needs a grandiose, fantastical, explosive, what's it called? Like, you know, constant, every page, two of a kind, you know, like explosion. What I'm talking about, yeah, is a moment akin to what happens in casting the runes. Now, there's a moment in which the protagonist moves their hand somewhere and they touch and feel a mouth. Something like that is what I'm talking about. Just, you know, of course I described it as, you know, like for a moment he sees and there's eyes on the wall or something. Sure, you may call that crude or something. I don't mind. But the feeling, the illusion of something, right? Because at the next moment he could say like, oh, it is just a crystallized wall, and because I looked at it in a certain light, it just looked like my eyes reflected upon it, and that's what made me creep out. I don't particularly think that is a crude concept. What I'm talking about is something that would be punchy, not just an old man telling a young man, "Don't touch this book. This is evil." I'm talking about something strange happening to lure you in. Is what I
The
mean.
example you gave, the chap reaching his hand and touching this horrible thing and casting the runes, doesn't come that early in the story. There's been a lot of build-up before that.
Well, casting the runes is shorter than this. So
Is it?
yeah, it's only 11 pages.
You sure?
Well, that's how I remember it. Maybe I'm wrong. A4 definitely. A4 11 pages. That's how I printed it out.
Anyway,
Either way, if we ever have a movie night, we must watch The Ring, the Japanese version.
Oh no! All right. I don't want. You really want Robert to be hospitalized because of you, huh? Is that what you want?
So first of all, the reason why I brought up The Ring is because, in contrast to a lot of other horror movies, what The Ring does is it builds dread and suspense, and there was never any point that I recall where it actually builds up to a scare. It's the whole movie is just a very oppressive a sense of being really oppressed by the weird stuff that's happening. And I think I kind of get what you're trying to say. You wanted there to be more of that flavor of the supernatural, more explicit atmosphere of it.
Yeah,
I suppose
that's exactly right.
I suppose I could see that, but to me that is that seems to be a matter of taste. I think some people would prefer more explicit atmosphere, and I guess some people would prefer a more very close to normal situation like this. But yeah, what do you think, Rob? What's your preference?
I honestly don't. I simply have to sound a bit boring here and say I just don't see anything in that particular objection to the story. In fact, I don't really have any objections to this story. I am capable of expressing some objections to some aspects of some Clark Ashton Smith stories. For example, another Averoigne story, which I also like very much, is just called A Rendezvous in Averoigne, and it's another vampire story. And it's, if you think that the one we've just been talking about is predictable, this one, A Rendezvous in Averoigne, is super predictable. There's really, really, really nothing in it that's not predictable. I like it, but I can see that the predictability just goes maybe a bit too far. It's not nearly as interesting as the end of the story, or as lots of the other Averoigne stories. So I'm not too bedazzled by Smith's skill as a writer to pick holes in it, but I don't think there are any holes to pick in this particular one, the end of the story.
It was a very minor point, I do admit. However, the only tale that I've ever written, if I could, that I've ever read that had no issues whatsoever, right? That was flawless, was 2 pages long, right? You just can't fit a fault in something like that. But in my opinion, every tale, and by the way, you were right, Casting the Runes is 1,000 words longer than what's it called, than the end of the story. But that is actually fascinating to me.
Nikki,
I'll get back to this point.
You should learn by now never to argue with Rob when it comes to how long a story is.
Right. That's right. I will be conscious next time, but sometimes I mean, enjoy
Rob,
being burned.
Rob has encyclopedic knowledge of all this stuff.
That's right. So regardless, I think you can embetter any story that comes across our podcast, regardless who has written it. Was it the now man reaching martyrdom in Robert's eyes, Clark Ashton Smith, or was it Ernest Hemingway, who is considered by some people an author. You can't hear XJ laughing, but he is
Bird.
Honestly, what a pile of garbage that the snows from Kilimanjaro. I'm sorry to say, I didn't want to say it at the podcast because I was still thinking like, there's this good point about it, there's that thing about it, but now after ruminating on it and attempting to read it for a third time just to see if I could pick up on anything, I was just like this. It's like it's not even worth the Alan Moore situation where it's like read a bad story to learn something. I'll learn nothing from this pile of garbage.
There aren't any lamias in it. That's the trouble.
Exactly.
Or
no
aliens,
pew-pews.
yeah.
No pew-pews.
No pew-pews.
That's
No
the
pew-pews.
biggest problem. All right, we're coming up to an hour. So any last words?
So before we go to the last words, Rob, you mentioned that there are more stories in this cycle. Does that mean that there's an actual sequel to this story, or no?
Not to this particular one. No, they aren't linked by sequels and prequels. If you see what I mean, they're all independent stories, but they're all set in the same medieval French province of Averoigne.
Oh, very cool. Because in that case, I do have a sequel idea for you to consider, and it would be I think they call them prequels, where you go back, and it would be about Hilaire and how Hilaire got where he did, and you could either take it the way I did, where you would call it, all right. Here you go. This is the stale, right? You read it, and it's this guy called Hilaire, and he is from ancient Greece, and he is helping out in the Athens, and there's a situation there where people are being sent to war to fight with the Persian Empire, and he is one of those who gets to stay. And the narrative follows him as he tries to go through ancient Greece and record what's happening to people during this war because he fancies himself a scholar and so on and so forth. Then he meets somebody who has a following, and it's that Lamia, right? And at the end, we end in him meeting her and her sort of charming him, and the story would be called The Beginning of the Story.
Well, my last word is I don't know if I quite like your idea, Nikki, but I definitely am on the same page with you that if there is a sequel or prequel or whatever, it has to be about Hilaire.
For sure. You could, like if you had more time, you could have thought of a cooler introduction for Hilaire and his backstory, right? It's just something that came to me as we were talking.
It's kind of interesting how the side character is more interesting than the main character, isn't it?
I mean, I could say that about many tales. Even so, for example, The Devil's Daughter. For me, the most interesting guy in it is the daughter's husband. And we learn very little about him and what actually is happening with him. But he is the most interesting character there because he is the driver of the plot, right? He's the person who, because everything happens because of this interesting man. Let's put it
totally.
As far as the end of the story, I give it an 8 out of 10. Solid.
Rob?
Solid.
Your verdict?
4 marks, actually. I'd give it a
10 out of 10.
Yeah.
Is that the first time?
Oh, I can't remember. I think he's given something else 10 out of 10 where I disagreed with it. So this must not be this the first time. 10 out of 10. Come, you can see no flaw. Really.
I can't, no. Although I don't think it's as good as Zethra, but Zethra was trying to do more than this one. So a 10 out of 10 for Zethra means more than a 10 out of 10 for the end of the story.
Yeah, well, then you have to rank it lower. That's not how it works,
Yeah.
Robert. You can't just be like, well, this 10 out of 10 means this, and this 10 out of 10 means that. That's not how mathematics work.
How
Well, yes,
about a
if you're talking
9.8?
about percentages, then a percentage, 100% of one thing is not as much as 100% of a bigger thing, but it's still 100% because you're still exhausting the possibilities of that particular thing.
Robert, what's heavier? A kilogram of feathers or a kilogram of gold?
Well, they're both the same weight, but one of them has a
No
bigger
shit.
volume.
Yeah, so a 10 out of 10, it is a 10 out of 10. It's, you know, you can't be like, well, this 10 out of 10 weighs heavier.
Well, I can because I just have. I've just used
Just because you've used words to say it doesn't mean that it is a logical thing that you've said. Is what I'm trying to tell to you. Oh
Well,
god.
I haven't yet experienced that emotion one feels when one has been overmastered in argument. I still feel that, I still feel that I'm right.
Well, I mean, that's good for you. I'm just saying I'm translating to you how I hear what you're saying, right? That kilogram of feathers is lighter than a kilogram of gold. That's what I'm hearing from you. And to me, that's just
I don't
insane.
approve of kilograms anyway.
Oh, fuck it. A pound of feathers and the pound of gold, whatever you
Oh,
want.
now you're talking. Yes, that's
No, you're good. We can't hear you, actually. I just realized.
Oh, really? Okay,
Yeah.
I was just saying we're past the hour. So
And you need to go not to die. Yeah, what's your score?
I would give it a 7.5 out of 10. Mostly because it's not as gripping as the other Clark Ashton Smith's story. I'm basically comparing it to other. My percentage is relative to other Clark Ashton Smith stories.
Yeah. Mine is too. That's why, if we didn't have this scoring thing, but I would definitely give Zethra 10 out of 10. It is a fantastic tale.
I mean, I think it's pretty fair to compare Clark Ashton Smith's story to his other stories. If I'm comparing it to Hemingway, well, yeah, I'll give it a 9.8 out of 10.
If we're comparing any story to Hemingway, I'm giving it a 10 out of 10.
Burn. All right. So I guess that's the end of this episode. We end on a burn to Hemingway, poor dude.
Sorry, Hemingway. Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, you guys. And if you like the podcast and you want to hear more burns on Hemingway, please like and subscribe and all of that. Until next time.
Take care. Bye-bye.
But